Daddy, I'm scared. Danny's small fingers gripped Marcus's shirt as they walked through the gleaming hospital corridors. The 3-year-old's fever had spiked again, and Marcus's construction worker salary barely covered the emergency room visit. His wife, Sarah, had left him 6 months ago, saying she couldn't handle the financial stress anymore. Marcus adjusted his son's Superman pajamas and forced a smile. "Remember what we talked about, buddy? You're my little superhero." The pediatric ward buzzed with activity. Nurses in colorful scrubs moved between rooms, their shoes squeaking against polished floors. Marcus approached the reception desk, where a kind-faced woman with graying hair looked up from her computer. "I'm Marcus Thompson," he said, his voice tight with worry. "My son Danny has an appointment with Dr. Williams." The receptionist, whose name tag read Betty, smiled warmly. "Of course, Mr. Thompson. Dr. Williams is running a few minutes behind, but you can have a seat in the waiting area." As they settled into plastic chairs, Danny's fever seemed to break slightly. The boy's curious eyes began wandering around the bustling hallway. Suddenly, he perked up, pointing toward the elevator bank where several people in business suits were walking. "Daddy?" Danny's voice was barely a whisper. "That's Mommy." Marcus's heart stopped. He followed his son's pointing finger to see a woman in an elegant navy suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a professional bun. She was surrounded by hospital administrators, clearly in some kind of important meeting. "Danny, sweetheart." Marcus's voice cracked. "Mommy moved far away, remember?" "That's not." But the woman turned slightly, and Marcus felt the world tilt. The profile, the way she held her shoulders, it looked exactly like Sarah, but this woman exuded confidence and authority that his struggling wife had never possessed. Betty noticed his stunned expression. "That's our new CEO, Ms. Catherine Wells," she said proudly. "She's been incredible for this hospital, really turned things around." Catherine Wells, not Sarah Thompson. Marcus exhaled slowly, feeling foolish. "Sorry, my son thought he recognized someone." Danny squirmed in his lap, still staring. "But Daddy," I asked Mommy, "look at her hands." Marcus glanced back. The woman was gesturing as she spoke, and even from this distance, he could see a small scar on her left hand. The same scar Sarah had gotten from a childhood accident she told him about on their first date. His pulse quickened. "Danny, stay here with Betty for just 1 minute, okay?" The receptionist nodded understanding, and Marcus stood on shaky legs. He walked closer to the group, pretending to study a hospital directory on the wall. The woman's voice carried clearly. "We need to prioritize our pediatric services." Catherine Wells was saying, "Too many families are struggling to afford basic care for their children." The voice, God, it was Sarah's voice. Marcus's mind raced. Sarah had always been intelligent, had been studying business administration online before Danny was born, but she dropped out when money got tight. She'd worked at a small medical billing company before Danny arrived. Could she have somehow? "Daddy." Danny's call made him turn. The boy had wiggled off Betty's lap and was toddling toward the group of executives. "Danny, no." Marcus lunged forward, but his son was already tugging on Catherine Wells's navy skirt. The woman looked down, and Marcus saw her face fully for the first time. His knees nearly buckled. It was Sarah, older, more polished, wearing expensive makeup, but unmistakably his wife. Sarah's face went pale. Her professional composure cracked. "Danny," she whispered. "Mommy, I knew it was you." Danny raised his arms to be picked up. The hospital administrators looked confused. One of them, a tall man with silver hair, stepped forward. "Catherine, is everything all right?" Sarah's hands were shaking as she knelt to Danny's level. I need a moment." She looked up at Marcus, her eyes filled with tears and something that looked like shame. "Please, can we talk?" Marcus felt like he was drowning. "Sarah, what the hell is going on? You left us. You said you couldn't handle being poor anymore. You said." "Not here," she whispered urgently. "Please, there's a conference room on the 3rd floor, room 312. The silver-haired administrator cleared his throat. "Catherine, we have the board meeting in 20 minutes. "Reschedule it." John Harrison, she said, her CEO voice returning briefly. Then, softer to Marcus, please, I owe you an explanation. 15 minutes later, they sat across from each other in a sterile conference room. Danny was coloring at a small table in the corner, having been given crayons and paper by a sympathetic nurse. Your name isn't Catherine Wells, Marcus said flatly. Sarah took a shuddering breath. It is now. Legally, I changed it 4 months ago. Why? Tears spilled down her cheeks, smudging her carefully applied makeup. Because I was a coward. Because I thought if I became someone else completely, I could pretend I never hurt you both. Marcus clenched his fists. You walked out on us. You left a note saying you couldn't live in poverty anymore. You abandoned your 3-year-old son. I know. Her voice broke. I know, and I hate myself for it every single day. Then why? And how did you become the CEO of a hospital in 6 months? That's impossible. Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue. Do you remember my Uncle Robert? My mom's brother, who moved to California when I was a teenager. Marcus nodded slowly. Sarah had mentioned him a few times, but they'd never met. He's been following medical technology companies his whole career, made millions in biotech investments. Sarah's voice was steadier now. When I left you, I was broken, Marcus. I called him from a gas station in Nevada, sobbing. I told him I destroyed my family because I couldn't handle being poor anymore. She paused, looking at Danny. Uncle Robert had just bought controlling interest in 3 struggling hospitals, including this one. He offered me a deal. He'd pay for an intensive MBA program, 6 months compressed, with the best business minds in the country, private tutors, management consultants. In exchange, I'd help him turn around his hospitals. Marcus stared at her. You've been studying for 6 months? 18 hours a day. I barely slept. I threw myself into learning everything about healthcare management, finance, operations. It was easier than thinking about what I'd done to you and Danny. But why didn't you call? Why didn't you? Because I was terrified you'd never forgive me. And because... She took a shaky breath. Because I wanted to be worthy of you both again. I want to come back and be able to take care of my family the way you deserved. Danny looked up from his coloring. Mommy, why are you crying? Sarah's composure completely broke. Because Mommy made a terrible mistake. Sweetheart, I left you and Daddy when I should have stayed and work harder. Marcus felt his anger battling with something else. Hope? Sarah, you didn't have to become CEO of a hospital to be worthy. We just needed you to stay. I know that now, she whispered, but I was so scared of failing you, of watching you work yourself to death trying to support us. I thought if I could just fix everything financially by abandoning us. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd come back when I could provide better for you both. She looked at Danny, but every day that passed made it harder to pick up the phone. How do you call your husband and son after walking out on them? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. You could have started with, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The words came out as a sob. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But seeing Danny today, seeing how you've been taking care of him alone. She wiped her eyes. I realized I gave up the only things that ever really mattered. Danny abandoned his coloring and climbed into his mother's lap. Don't be sad, Mommy. Daddy says superheroes don't give up. Sarah held her son tightly, breathing in his familiar scent. Your daddy's right. And Mommy gave up when she should have been a superhero for her family. Marcus watched them together, his heart breaking and healing simultaneously. The board meeting you mentioned, what's it about? We're launching a program for low-income families. Free pediatric care for construction workers, service employees, single parents. She met his eyes. People like us. Like us. I've been Catherine Wells for 4 months, but I'm still Sarah Thompson, the girl who married a good man and had a beautiful son, and was too scared to trust that love was enough. Marcus reached across the table and touched her hand, the one with the familiar scar. It would have been enough. It still is. 3 hours later, as Danny finally saw Dr. Williams and got the medicine he needed, Sarah sat in her CEO office staring at a framed photo she kept hidden in her desk drawer. It was from Danny's second birthday, the three of them covered in chocolate cake, laughing. Betty knocked on the door. "Ms. Wells, the board is asking about rescheduling." "Actually, Betty," Sarah said, pulling the photo out and setting it prominently on her desk, "could you please ask them to come here instead? I have an announcement to make." "Of course. Also, that nice Mr. Thompson and his little boy are in the waiting room. He said to tell you Danny wants to show you his Superman cape when you're done working." Sarah smiled through her tears. "Tell them I'll be right there. I have a family to go home to." As she prepared to face her board and explain why the hospital's new family support program was so important to her personally, Sarah realized she'd finally learned something her uncle's money couldn't teach her. Sometimes the greatest success comes from admitting your failures and asking for a second chance. Outside in the waiting room, Marcus watched Danny demonstrate his superhero poses to Betty, who applauded each one enthusiastically. His phone buzzed with a text, "I'm ready to be Sarah Thompson again. Are you ready to be a family again? S." He looked up to see his wife standing in the doorway of the pediatric ward, having traded her CEO suit for scrubs borrowed from a nurse. She looked like the Sarah he'd fallen in love with, vulnerable, hopeful, and finally home. "What do you think, Danny?" Marcus asked his son. "Should we give Mommy another chance to be our superhero?" Danny ran to his mother with his arms wide. "Superheroes always get second chances, Daddy." As Sarah scooped up her son and reached for her husband's hand, Betty wiped her own eyes and thought about how sometimes the best medicine wasn't found in any prescription bottle. It was found in the courage to come home,